Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Cinemaniacs, as James likes to call you. This is Devin. I've got James here. We're here for another episode of Den of Cin, and it's a very special episode of Den of Cin. I think we're all feeling a little light on Halloween this year due to the pandemic, and I'm happy to say that here at the Den of Cin, we've actually got a trick-or-treater. An old friend of ours. James, would you like to introduce our old buddy?
Not really. Sure, I'll take it. Hey, guys. We've got with us today Mr. Casey O'Connor. Casey, introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. Glad to be here.
How you doing today, Casey?
I'm good, man. Just recovering from the weekend, trying to psych myself up for work tomorrow. You know how it goes.
I feel that. I know Devin feels that. You know, to our listeners, a few episodes ago, and it was not planned, I promise you. A few episodes ago, I sort of made a off-the-cuff sort of unpaid promotion for Voltage VHS, which is a company that makes these really cool converts actual VHS cassettes into lamps. Coincidentally, today we have one of the owners of that company with us today, Casey. So Casey is the co-owner, right? Am I saying that? Is that correct?
me and our friend Shane Merrill, who we went to high school with. He's more the technological genius behind the whole thing, and I've kind of just hopped in because I saw the potential in it and helping out the company in other ways. But Shane is definitely like the master builder of the actual lamps.
Yeah, it was his idea, right?
Yeah.
So you decided to get on there, just like your father, kind of use your salesman skills and
basically,
help.
You know, it was like I went to film school. I work in film and TV. You know, taking classes on visual design and all that. So basically, I'm mostly the voice of the business, and I also have a lot of input on like the actual like lighting and sound concepts that we do for the lamps.
That's cool.
That kind of thing. So.
Well, I'm a proud owner of two. I should also say I did get them for free, so I didn't actually pay for these.
Well, you did. I have to say, you did our amazing logo, which
that's right. That's true.
It was a home run, man. That thing looks awesome.
I appreciate that. So, but they're awesome. So I felt like I said the other time, I just reinstalled it because I'd cleaned my studio, and I was literally next to me, and I was like, I should give a little shout out for this. But anyways, enough for promotion. Today,
wait, one moment. Did we say where they could find these lamps?
Oh, no, yeah. That's probably important.
Casey,
otherwise, what's the point?
Let us know where we can find the lamps and
yeah, sure.
check out the goods, so to speak, because these things are really cool. They definitely have a forward-facing technology element and all nostalgia behind it. I love that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so first and foremost, we have our website, which is voltagevhs.com. I say the best thing to visit, I mean, the website's obviously good, especially if you want to buy something. But to see like the best like videos and kind of see like what we can do and kind of example of how tricked out we can get these, I say hit our Instagram, which is at Voltage VHS Lamps. So we got videos and we got still photos on there and stuff that we do. We do all kinds of matching sound and light concepts depending on the movie. You know, it's all custom to basically how anybody wants it. So we could do a lot of stuff with them.
So rad.
Very cool. Now, Casey, you already kind of gave us a little bit of your film background with your education and everything, but the viewers or the listeners, I'm still always stumbling all over that. The listeners would probably enjoy knowing that we've all known each other since high school. You guys were a couple years ahead of me, so I really only knew you on the way out of high school. But you guys have known each other since like junior high, and we've been, thick as thieves ever since. Even though we all live in different towns and one of us lives in a different state, all that.
Yeah,
I've seen so many of my favorite movies at your house. I've seen at your current house and, at your parents' house. I know, calling back to the last podcast about Willem Dafoe, I know for a fact the first time I ever saw Streets of Fire was at your house.
Yeah, I'm a big proponent of Streets of Fire, as Jim is too. I like to the point where in fact, I know I've made people mad. Like
hey, so if you're not making friends mad,
we watch recommendations. I throw on Streets of Fire, and they're like, "What in the fuck are you doing?"
That's 50% of my life is just annoying people with the films I want them to watch. Yeah, it was funny though because I was saying to somebody recently that so many of my most vital film memories are directly tied with you two. I saw them with one of you two, or sometimes with both of you two. So that was a great time. First off, I think we are the generation, first off, where we were raised in the greatest period for pop culture anyways.
Absolutely.
Late 70s and throughout the 80s and early 90s. And then we were in our 20s and in our formative years, we saw sort of the birth of like modern film nerd culture. So, and then the advent of like, conventions and all those sorts of things. But yeah, so I feel like this is a long time coming. I feel like we definitely, this is a road we've all been headed down anyway. So let's do it. Let's get into it. Let's start talking about some movies. I'm excited.
All right. Yeah.
Let's do it.
Now that we've got the candy corn out of the way, now we can get to the actual candy bars at the bottom of the bag here. And we have a great topic for this particular holiday today. This is something that we all, I think, saw as inevitable as a topic coming up. And this is actually a person whose name has probably come up in almost every episode we've done so far.
Probably.
Pretty close. I actually think Paul Schrader might hold the record.
That's true.
For the person who's been mentioned the most, but yet that we have not done a show about.
But he's coming, though. He is definitely coming.
He is. But today we're going to talk about John Carpenter, of course. Now, we all have our own personal histories with John Carpenter. I just to throw this out there because it was a fun recent memory. In fact, I think it was the last time Casey and I were even in the same building before all this mess hit the world. But we actually went and saw Tom Atkins at the Egyptian Theater.
Yeah, Beyond Fest.
Yes, for a triple feature of, it was Night of the Creeps, Halloween 3, and John Carpenter's The Fog.
That's a good
yeah, man, that was a fun day.
Let's go ahead and just get into The Fog then. Let's screw going linear since we've already talked about a lot of these. Any thoughts on The Fog, guys? Or Casey, anything you want to tell us about seeing Atkins? Because it was a pretty good time. Well,
as far as the Atkins event go, that day was great. Like, I kind of only recently, probably in the past 5 years, like kind of seen all the films that like Atkins has kind of been champion for, like Night of the Creeps. The Fog, I actually was late to the game on. I barely saw that for the first time a couple of years ago as well. While I was on a Carpenter kick of trying to like see basically all of his stuff. And now I own a huge frame poster of The Fog, oddly enough. So it's not my absolute favorite of his, but it's definitely amazing and it's definitely fun to watch. Yeah, we can elaborate more if you guys got more to say.
Oh, it's one that, for me, tends to just grow better every time I saw it. When I was younger and seeing it, there's never been a time where I haven't enjoyed it. But I don't think that I was fully linked into it. When I was younger, I wanted more like The Thing. I still want more of The Thing, but we're getting a little ahead of ourselves here. But The Fog is really a fantastic movie, and it's his contribution to ghost stories.
Yep.
And Carpenter has actually pointed out that this was his version of an EC comic, which...
I can definitely see that.
Totally understandable. Yeah.
Yeah. Once you know that, like, I actually kind of wish that there was like an accompanying EC comic graphic novel sort of thing to accompany The Fog. Somebody ought to get on that.
Oh, it's probably coming. I mean, he has his own comic label, so who knows?
He does. He almost
Storm King Comics.
Too. Yes. And he almost turned it into a television show as well. It was going to be about a different, I don't know if it was a different town or whether it was The Fog visiting a different person within the town or what, but each episode was going to be a different person's story concerning The Fog, and by the end of the season, they were all going to come together.
How soon after the movie was that planned or getting developed?
I'm not sure the dates. My guess on it would be probably sometime in the 90s. My guess is that it was probably either a syndicated sort of thing like Tales from the Dark Side or like a cable thing like Carpenter's own Body Bags. It was definitely prior to any kind of streaming. So
that would have been interesting.
Yeah, that would have been really cool. And this just dawned on me too. How many people that were in The Fog the very next year were in George Romero's EC Comics tribute?
That's right. Yes. I was going to say.
Adrian Barbeau,
very large
Hal Holbrook, and Atkins. Tom Atkins was in both.
Yep, that's correct. So. All legendary. I think The Fog is sort of quintessential John Carpenter. Obviously, it's not as iconic as, say, like The Thing or Halloween, but I think it's like, it says everything he's good at. You're going to hear me say this a lot, but the score is fantastic. In fact, I actually will hold it as probably the penultimate John Carpenter score, which I know maybe some people would find shocking. I will definitely get into my favorite in a while, but I think it's great. I actually chose it for me and some work friends. We do this thing where we choose like one specific subgenre of horror movies. And for my ghost movie this year, I chose The Fog because I think it is, first of all, it's a vastly underappreciated ghost movie. The designs of the pirate ghosts are incredible, the way that they film them. But, I think it's it's probably Carpenter's best looking movie by that point. Like, the movie just looks amazing. The way that he used that town, that coastal town, was perfect. Also, Hal Holbrook in this is amazing. Like and his ending is so rewarding, but like I think it's fantastic. It's one of the John Carpenter films that I feel is more reward. I get more reward out of it each time I view it. Like every time I watch, I'm like, oh man, I think I appreciate that a little bit more than even I already did. So, yeah, it's not. I wouldn't say it's his best movie, but it's definitely quintessential vintage John Carpenter, and I do think it's in that top 10.
I definitely think it's more rewarding upon multiple viewings because, like I said, it wasn't one I grew up with. It's one I basically saw the first time maybe a couple years ago, and I think honestly I've only seen it like twice. But even in the second time, I grew more appreciation of it. Not that I didn't like it to begin with, but it's like you just, you see more about it and you like pick up on more creative choices and the look of it and and like you said, the music and everything. Once you've gone through the initial run through of it, you see it more times. It definitely resonates more, and you see like kind of what is so great about it.
Yeah, and he obviously he had sort of his quintessential cast in there with Adrienne Barbeau and Jamie Lee Curtis and Janet Leigh. So his ex-wife was in the movie, but yeah, it's definitely a thing where I will say, as somebody who feels it's my responsibility sometimes to defend the remake, that remakes aren't inherently bad. It's what you do with them. It's just like anything. It's like, do you have a vision for your remake? What are what are you trying to do with it? It's all about, execution. But I will say that the Fog remake is one of the most despicable fucking movies I've ever seen in every manner. And God damn, dude, like it just makes me appreciate that much more.
I haven't even bothered watching it. I don't know if I could bring myself to do it.
There was a time when I was really hoping that Smallville kid was
Tom Welling.
Tom Welling was going to do something, but that was my bad. So,
well, let's just to kind of get it out of the way. Let's maybe briefly go over the TV career work of John Carpenter with
let's do it.
Elvis and Somebody Watching Me.
I just watched Somebody's Watching Me today for the very first time, and for a 1978 TV like movie of the week, it's pretty damn good.
Yeah, dude. First off, any movie with Lauren Hutton and Adrienne Barbeau, I'm gonna watch that movie.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I haven't. On the inverse, I have seen it once, and I haven't seen it in probably 5 or 6 years. Is when it got its first Blu-ray or DVD release or whatever. Maybe it's even been longer than maybe almost 10 years. But yeah, I do remember, like, obviously I'd seen Halloween first, and there was a few scenes in that where I'm like, oh, I see where you got that shit for Halloween. But it's definitely a Hitchcockian. It's not amazing. It's just, I mean, it is exactly what it looks like. A very Hitchcock-inspired sort of thriller. But it's good. The cast is great. He always does really interesting things with his female characters, and I mean, it's serviceable. Like it's good. It just, I don't know if it's super memorable, but it's very serviceable for what it is.
I don't know if serviceable for what it is a positive review.
I mean, I definitely think if you're a fan of Carpenter and want to see all his work, like, I don't think you'd be disappointed watching it.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's definitely interesting to see, like, there's a small documentary with Carpenter on the disc for it that Shout Factory put out that I watched afterwards. And he talks about how busy he was and how much he learned in 1978, because it was like, I mean, 2 weeks after he was done with Someone's Watching Me, he went on to do Halloween.
Halloween, yep.
I forget what the third thing he did that year was. I can't remember. Maybe it was another TV project or something.
He was making Elvis was released in 79.
It was Elvis.
But
it was
he
Elvis.
was making Elvis in 78. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but correct me if I'm mistaken, if I'm mistaken, but Someone's Watching Me was supposed to be a theatrical release. It wasn't actually originally intended to be a TV movie, right? It
was written to be a theatrical release. I don't know the backstory as to how it eventually became a TV release, but it was theatrical overseas.
From what I saw in that documentary today, it was basically, he had written it years ago, but I think it was like his agent or somebody that when they were shopping around, they're like, it's fine, but there's not enough to it to be like a theatrical release. So why don't we try it for TV? And I think that's how that came about.
Interesting. I will say we don't need to get into The Eyes of Laura Mars or, like we said before we started filming, all of the things he's written. But there is definitely a weird, if you've seen both, there is definitely a weird vibe that they both have. Like, right. You can tell they came from the same dude around the same time as far as like...
And he even says, and again, this documentary wasn't bad, that, he took a lot of, because Someone's Watching Me was like the first union thing he ever did. And so he saw like how fast like the TV guys worked, which was something that was completely, different from his just kind of like running and gunning shit on like Assault on Precinct 13 and Dark Star, So he's like, I learned a lot from those guys because, I definitely incorporated a lot of that into Halloween, which I started shooting right after. He's like, I learned a lot of just basic directing tenets on Somebody's Watching Me because, I was working with such like pro people for the first time that,
I can imagine.
He's like, yeah, and there's definitely a lot of like shots and stuff that like, we tried in the TV movie that I definitely brought on to Halloween.
Yeah. That was when we first started watching it was like,
Yeah,
like,
even like the Panaflex and stuff, like, there's a couple Panaflex shots and someone's watching me and you're like, oh, okay.
You know what would be interesting for Someone's Watching Me if Carpenter would write a score for it. I think it looks like a Carpenter film. It feels like a Carpenter film, but then the music is very TV movie of the week.
Yeah,
music.
and he
dun,
says
dun,
like that.
Dun, and
that was the first time he did that. He's like, because I was used to like scoring all my stuff, so it was the first time of actually going to like a session and like telling a scorer like, okay, this is where I want music here, this is where I want music here, and that kind of thing. He's like, so that was the first time that I did that, so that was kind of interesting to hear too.
Yeah, but I think it would feel more like a John Carpenter with that kind of a score.
Absolutely.
Obviously, 2020 hindsight, nobody in 1978 was thinking, let's let this kid record the score for this. I don't even know what network it was, but no network was going to allow that to happen. Although, speaking of music, just to speak briefly of Elvis, everybody knows Elvis's story. There's another Elvis movie coming out next year, supposedly, if there is a next year. And this was the first big Elvis movie. It was actually authorized, and Elvis's father was consulted on it. And it's pretty authentic. They combine some things for contextual purpose, all of that. Some of the clothes that Elvis is wearing in the movie are actually Elvis's clothes. That's kind of cool.
That's
and
cool.
It was produced only a year. Actually, it was probably produced only months after Elvis had passed away. So this thing was practically rushed into production on that level. But it's mostly notable because it's the first time that John Carpenter ever worked with Kurt Russell, who played Elvis, of course. And this was going to end up being kind of what shaped the rest of Carpenter and Russell's career. Did you guys see Elvis?
I still remember my mom was a fan of the Elvis TV movie, and she would talk about it. But a 3-hour biopic of Elvis, I mean, if it's been available, like as far as like to own, I've never come across it. But
Shout Factory, of course, has it.
Of course, yeah. But yeah, no, I haven't. If I saw it when I was a kid, I was too young to remember. I just know I've seen the different clips over the years of Kurt Russell being Elvis, but I haven't seen the whole 3 hours now.
So I think there's only 3 Carpenter films I still have not seen. Elvis is one of them. The other 2 being Dark Star and The Ward. So it's like the beginning, the end, and then Elvis. I still need to experience. So
not to give too much of a spoiler alert, but if you're gonna miss 3, that's probably the 3.
Yeah, for real.
Probably what I figured. So,
in fact, I wish I had missed The Ward. Anyways, let's get on to it. But those are, before we move on though, Devin, I don't know if you wanted to touch upon them, but if you're talking about his TV work, I do have to say his 2 episodes for Masters of Horror are 2 of the best in the series. Pro-life is interesting. I don't know if I like it. I mean, it's an interesting concept, and it definitely comes across very cheesy. I think more cheesy than maybe, but again, they're low budget, working with a low budget television. But Cigarette Burns is really good. I think it's actually probably in the top 3 best Masters of Horror episodes. And it's like I remember the first time I watched it, I was like, man, I would have liked to have seen this like expanded like into an actual feature. I actually thought with more money and, like it could have been a really interesting story. But yeah, I feel like, and Masters of Horror is very, very hit or miss overall. Some decent directors turned in some pretty shitty movies. And I forget who did the George Wendt one, The Family. That one was really good. Oh, that was John Landis. Anyways, I just talked about that. I feel like it had to be mentioned because they're actually pretty solid. They're pretty solid little, whatever you want to call them, mini movies. I don't know. What you want to call
them. I like Cigarette Burns was actually written by Ain't It Cool news writer.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
I don't think he works for the site anymore, but yeah, he was working there when that happened. So
is that site still around?
I think.
I haven't been to that
for
website.
For all the movie news sites
years.
I go to, that's not one I still go to.
No, not in years. Yeah.
But wasn't Harry Knowles kind of called out or something?
I think remember that. Yeah, something like that. Part of the Me Too shit. Yeah.
Possibly. I mean, no offense to any of the fans of the site, but I've never been a big Harry Knowles fan.
No,
honestly. So
I do think
I met him once and I was not impressed.
I don't have any personal experience with him, but and I can kind of respect what he did, but I do think that he was kind of the beginning of the more outspoken nerds who I oftentimes considering I consider myself a nerd. I'm a movie geek, but there are some movie geeks that I just want to tell to shut the fuck up and sit down. And I think Harry Knowles kind of helped that movement come to more of a fruition and gave a voice to a bunch of people who probably should just be giving the voice to their basement wall.
Yeah, it's basically like going to an LA film Q&A, but on like a website. Because like one of my biggest pet peeves, like living in LA, is anytime there's like a Q&A, and like unless it's like curated and it's like by someone that like knows what they're talking about and is like asking pertinent questions, like I'm fine with it. But as soon as I go, let's take some questions to the audience, I will make a fucking flash dash right out the gate because I can't take it. It's painful, man. Like
it can get bad.
I will say this about Harry Knowles though. That dude nobody has ever benefited from looking like a fucking real life caricature of a nerd than that dude with his 700-pound red afro. Like he just, when you looked at him, like the only thing you can do is either shoot yourself in the face or become an internet nerd celebrity. Those are your only two options in life. Somehow he eked out that second one against all odds. But yeah, dude, F that dude, and F that website, and F that well, I can say everybody who's ever involved in that website because the guy who worked there wrote a pretty interesting little movie. So I take back that last point, but not the first two.
And you know who did, just to kind of straighten the train here, who did the music for the John Carpenter Masters of Horror, right?
His son?
Yeah, Cody Carpenter. It was his beginning as a music composer for film.
Oh, nice.
So
that's all Carpenter does now is just plays music with his son. So
and play video games.
Yeah. Suck whatever. Who's the guy that came up with like Silent Hill and all those games? I forget his name. I'm not a video game guy particularly, but I always hear that guy's name. But I know John Carpenter just wants to suck that dude's dick, or like I used to. And I guess that dude then said some shit about John Carpenter or about movies, and then John Carpenter. I don't know. Let's not go down that road. But real quick, while we're speaking about his music, though, I will say one of the biggest letdowns in my life was the year I was moving out here to Texas. All my friends went to go see John Carpenter fucking live, play his music live, and I've never had more fucking FOMO in my life. Like seeing those social media posts, I was so fucking depressed.
Yeah, sorry, man. That was a fun ass concert.
I bet. I know.
Casey, you invited me to go with you, and I can't even remember why I couldn't. I think I had to work.
Yeah, I definitely recommend seeing Carpenter live if you can. It's really fun. You know, they have the according, like, you know, movie footage playing behind them with each song and whatnot. All the like original like Lost Soul stuff is great live. You know, it's a fun time. And he's not very like talkative. He's just kind of like this old man going, all right, let's go.
Yeah.
And, like, does his thing, and we'll throw up like the devil horns every now and then just to like get into the spirit of stuff, and then like the music and the accompanying visuals is pretty much speak for itself, and then you're done and you're like, wow, that was fantastic. It's like the most non-bullshit like show you could go to. Like,
I always imagine like he should do one concert and then like for like the second and last song have, what was the name of that band, the Cadillacs?
The Coupe de Villes.
The Coupe de Villes. Have the Coupe de Villes come out and play that terrible fucking song.
Dude, everybody would have lost their shit if the Coupe de Villes like reunited on stage. Trust me, because everyone there was just like total Carpenter fanboy.
nerd bonering.
Yeah.
All right, let's get back. Let's get back on track. I take partial blame for that.
Sorry.
No, it's important. It's important to talk about his music because his music is such a big part of who he is as an artist, and it does incorporate into the films.
And let's be honest, probably one of the most influential aspects of him as a creator, as an artist, has been the music. Probably the most ripped off. In fact, it has spawned an entire subgenre of music now. There are people who basically rip off John Carpenter as their musical careers. And I don't mean for film. I just mean as bands. I'm looking at you, Magic Sword and Reverberator. And anyways, let's not.
Well, the thing I think is great about like his music career is that he basically just did it because he couldn't afford anybody else to do it, and so he's just like, well, shit, I guess I'll do it. And no matter like how minimal, it may seem to like what actually composes the music, the sound, and like, the memories it triggers when you're watching his films, like when you hear a specific cue and stuff, it's like, it's just amazing.
I have you will hopefully be the right people to share this memory with, but I still remember being in, I think, 7th grade at the Moore Junior High School Halloween dance. Maybe it was 9th grade. It might have been 8th or 9th grade. Either way, we were sitting outside, and they were playing music before you could go in. People were hanging outside. But I remember staying outside, and all of a sudden they started playing, the Halloween theme, and literally getting chills, being like, as soon as those chords hit, like being like, oh, I actually feel a little freaked out and spooked out. And, just hang out in front of a fucking junior high school auditorium waiting for the doorstep. And that's the power of like what he did, in the fact that it's so affecting and so haunting and so precise. And it's, and he did that over and over and over again through movies. And again, very similar sounds, but every time master at using a goddamn synthesizer to freak people out. So
absolutely.
Well, since we're going with the music, let's just, because I don't know exactly where it will fit in anywhere else here. The first film that he scored for himself was Assault on Precinct 13, which anyone doesn't know this film by now, you were severely missing out. It's not a horror film. It's not a Halloween film. It definitely has some creepy vibes to it, though.
It's tense.
And you can clearly see Carpenter's Western inspiration in this, because it's got elements of Rio Bravo, El Dorado, all that sort of thing. And it's actually something that carried on through other films that he made as well, including some of the stuff he's made this century, still has the stamp of Assault on Precinct 13 on it.
Yes, I can think of one particularly that I can't wait to talk about.
I was going to say, definitely, I think Escape from New York's good.
Yeah.
I will say that, I love that movie. In fact, Devin, I saw it in your living room. Well, at the time was your living room. Yeah, it's genius. I think it's probably his most unheralded movie, like as far as how great it is and how influential it was. It's a very tense, tight, like I said, I mean, it's like a 47th Street version of a Western. Definitely like a very urban film, but definitely has the spirit of a Western, and it's great. And I will even say, I don't hate the remake. While we're talking about remakes of Carpenter's works, it's one I don't hate. It doesn't hold up to the original, but it's a pretty serviceable film, and it actually speaks volumes of how great just the concept is, because of, and that was one thing Carpenter did really well, was forcing scenarios where two different kinds of people wouldn't normally have to fight, with each other, and sort of partner up. And that was a very interesting plot. I'm with you. If you had never seen it, watch
I couldn't agree more. It's, I don't really know how much more to elaborate on it, but it's definitely worthy of viewing. Like I said, especially if you're a Carpenter fan, because it is unlike a lot of stuff that he's done. You will see stuff in it that, you might see in later films. It's like, oh, he's kind of doing this again. But I mean, as a whole, there's nothing else in his filmography that's like it. And it's really enjoyable.
It is. And it's a movie where you can already tell that he's starting to lay the groundwork for not really being able to determine who the good guy and who the bad guy is in his films, based on the stereotypical tropes that he puts out there. The convict in this movie, I can't remember his name right now. Darwin, I think, is the name of the actor. But the scene where he gets thrown the shotgun to like help out with the siege on the, it's still one of my favorite moments. And I did want to point out, because I found this interesting, this movie almost got an X rating. And
oh, really?
Yes, yeah, I didn't know that.
This was, for anyone that doesn't know their lineage with the MPAA, this was prior to the NC-17 and prior to PG-13. So oftentimes there were huge reaches between a PG and an R and an R and an X. But in this film, there was just one scene that got it an X rating. And it's still in the movie because they tricked the MPAA by taking the scene out, showing it to the MPAA for their appeal, and then returning it to the Prince of the Movies before it came out of the theaters. Does anyone want to hazard to guess what scene was cut to, quote unquote, cut to save the R rating?
I personally don't know. It's been a while since I've seen Assault on Precinct 13, but I can't wait to find out.
James, any guesses?
And the character, by the way, the character's name is Wells.
Okay, Wells. Okay, we'll get back to Wells in just a moment then.
What were we saying? What film?
What
scene
what
caused it
scene
to
do
get
you
a? I have no idea.
You guys
Surprise
are
us.
you're gonna kick yourselves because you're not gonna be surprised once I say what it is. Little girl gets shot eating an ice cream cone.
Oh yeah. Oh, in fact, yeah, I remember.
Which is still a shocking
Makes
scene.
sense.
It's really the first thing that I remember when I think about that movie, actually, is how intense that scene is. You don't see it coming. It's not a spoiler alert. It's more of a plot point that carries the story forward rather than any kind of an ending. But yeah, this poor little girl who is the same girl that escaped Witch Mountain, and I think she's one of the Real Housewives. But yeah,
Kim Richards.
Yes, as a little girl, she got shot in the chest while buying an ice cream cone. Assault on Precinct 13, and that was a pretty good indicator you weren't going to be able to trust this filmmaker. He was going to do things that nobody else was doing. And to get back to Wells real quick, the convict in this movie who ends up having to become the hero to help out the main police officer. He was, in my opinion, the birth of the John Carpenter badass action hero.
Yes.
He used it so many times that it's become a signature of his. So let's go ahead and springboard right into his next big and perhaps biggest badass action hero, Snake Plissken in Escape from New York. James, you got any thoughts on Escape from New York?
Yeah, it's just one of the most important movies ever made. I mean, the thing is,
Citizen Kane, Escape from New York.
Well, I say that only slightly jesting, but if you think about how, first off, it sort of helped kick off the whole post-apocalyptic. It was one of the films that sort of helped kick off the whole post-apocalyptic. It really launched, the action era. I think at this point in his career, most people still associate Kurt Russell with his Disney movies. So, but yeah, I mean, it's again, everything about it. It works. It's a classic for a reason. It's one of the best. First off, just let's talk about Snake Plissken. He is the quintessential anti-hero. He's as cool as it comes. Everything about him comes all the design stuff of the character with the tattoo and the eye patch and the leather and all of his lines of dialogue. He just seems like it's iconic for a reason. Yeah, man, it's what you need to say. I mean, the one thing I will say is that I don't think it's not my favorite Kurt Russell, John Carpenter collaboration, but it's definitely close. But
it's fun.
It's wet.
Like the look of it, the concept. I mean, there's just so much good things happening in the movie that it's definitely a staple of his filmography. If not, I'm sure it's someone's favorite. But not necessarily mine. But I'll watch Escape from New York anytime it's on without question. So but yeah, I think what you're saying about the anti-hero is it's definitely kickstarts that type of attitude for certain characters that came in movies after. I definitely think probably Ash from Evil Dead 2 probably wouldn't exist at that.
Yeah,
without Snake Plissken. The first Evil Dead, he wasn't so machismo, but he definitely was in the second one.
Yes. Well, the thing is too, really, you could tell Kurt Russell, he was definitely channeling John Wayne and Clint Eastwood and different things, even down to the way he was sort of acting through his gritted teeth thing. But
there was a lot of Eastwood in there, especially. They even had Lee Van Cleef playing opposite him.
That's right.
Before he goes to war.
Totally.
So that was an overt reference almost.
But he it helped cement him to be a bigger star. And it's one of the it's just one of the it's seminal Carpenter, and I think it's just seminal of the genre. It's iconic for a reason. And again, Snake Plissken as a character has become iconic. Unfortunately, as we will get into, not used as entertain. Well, not as used as. Well, we'll get into it. We'll get into it. But
I also want to say that it's probably the ending of any Carpenter movie that entertains me the most.
Yeah.
Every time I see it, I just start laughing hysterically.
There's some big applause lines.
It's
towards the end there.
Yeah, it's definitely a must see as far as Carpenter goes. It's great.
What was Isaac Hayes' name in that? He was.
He's the Duke, number one.
The Duke.
Yeah.
You're the Duke,
Duke.
number one. I just think any movie that's got Isaac Hayes riding around in a pimped out Cadillac with chandeliers for headlights
Yeah, in a post-apocalyptic New York.
It's a good thing.
Fucking brilliant.
I mean, while we're talking about do you want to talk about Escape from LA right now?
There's probably no better.
Because I will say this is what I was going to say anyways. I've seen it twice. Once in the theater when it came out, and then once 5 years later, trying to think, I'm like, there's no way I hated that movie. I must have just, maybe it's a victim of too high expectations. Nope, I hated it as much the second time. Despite some pretty interesting or entertaining sequences that are super stupid, I hated it. And I people have become to defend the movie. To each their own, I guess, but nah, bro.
Let me say that you've seen it one more time than I have, because I've still have only seen it since when it was initially released. I remember thinking there was cool ideas within it, but I thought it was just way more slick and way more CGI heavy than I wanted it to be. I still wanted kind of the grittiness of the original.
Yes.
In it. And it was so much more of a Hollywood film that it was just so apparent.
But not only was it too slick, it was also despite a bigger budget, or maybe it didn't have a bigger budget, but it was definitely, they were trying to use the tools of the time. The tools of the time weren't up to what the job needed, and the effects look terrible. That green screen work on that shit is so bad.
The effects house that worked on that movie has actually come out since to say we didn't know what we were doing on that movie. I didn't fully research this. I didn't deep dive into it. Just enough to know that the even the effects company apologized for the effects. But the idea I got was that they were maybe a physical effects studio that was making the transition, and this was their first big gig. Because that was kind of an oh shit moment for special effects artists right there in the mid-'90s, where things started to switch. I mean, to the point that not even just the obvious sort of dinosaurs and larger explosions, but squibs and gunfire itself, still to this day is oftentimes CGI'd, and I can still, certain elements still piss me off. Use a squib. I don't care if you have to use CGI to create a giant snake or something, but if you're gonna, I agree. It's fake blood is just use fake blood. There was nothing wrong with the process at that point.
Yeah, practical and CGI should live hand in hand. It shouldn't be I mean, all practical effects movies aren't bad if you do them right, but an all CGI movie could go very bad, if it's not done right.
Especially at that period when it was still in a technology.
It was still formative. Jurassic Park was 93. I forget what year Escape from LA came out.
96.
Yeah, so you're 3 years after Jurassic Park, which was the game changer for all that. And so, you got a lot of effects houses now, trying to get their start and just basically throwing anything out there that they think will work.
And this was going to be ambitious for anybody that took it on. I think that this was probably more a victim of timing than anything else. This is the only movie that Kurt Russell has a writing credit on.
Yeah, isn't it Carpenter, Deborah Hill, and Kurt Russell have the screenwriting credits? So
you only wanted it if it was Carpenter and Hill together again, and Kurt apparently had a lot of ideas. Apparently the whole ending was his, which I would argue the whole ending was Carpenter's in the first movie, and Russell rewrote it for this.
Yeah, I could just totally see the three of them just probably smoking a joint and drinking, why don't we do this? Let's throw that in there.
And to me, that's the enjoyment of the movie. I will throw this movie a bone. I did see it under the best possible circumstances, because in 96, I was 17. I was still in high school, and my folks took us on a day trip to Hollywood and allowed me to invite my best friend, Greg, who listens to the show. Hi, Greg. And
what up, Greg?
What's up, Greg?
Hey, you guys have met Greg.
Greg Sargent.
But anyways, my folks took us out to go see Escape from LA on opening day at the Chinese Theater. So, and I think it might have actually been the first movie I ever saw at the Chinese Theater. I think that was the first thing on Hollywood Boulevard, the big Chinese. And the Chinese is even featured in Escape from LA. So by the time I was 17, I was no longer a kid. I wasn't just loving everything that I saw on a big screen. And there was enough in this movie to know that something was wrong. But the high of that experience, I'm willing to give this movie a pass as being fun. John Carpenter himself compared it to, he's a huge Howard Hawks fan, and so he compared these films to Rio Bravo and El Dorado, saying essentially, they're the same movie, but, they're fun. I think Carpenter is being a little too, I think he had too good of a time making it, maybe to be able to see it separately. But ultimately,
The problem is, so I just see it as a problem. I mean, there's definitely some execution problems, but the problem I feel is the tone. Because even though the first one had some satirical elements, it had some social commentary, and it had some wit to it, it wasn't as nearly as like trying to be so over the top with its satirical elements, and to the point that it's like, you know, it becomes like a fucking clown show. But
it was, and there's no excuse for Hershey, the Pam Grier
yes,
trans character, which is absolutely ridiculous. And they lowered Pam Grier's voice an octave and a half. Or Steve Buscemi trying to take on the Ernest Borgnine role from the original, except for that Borgnine was a good guy, usually trying to help out Snake, whereas Buscemi was a weaselly little shit that you really
Slim
bad guy.
Slim Flat Man, that's right. What a waste of Steve Buscemi. I think that I walked out of the theater and I think my first thought was, what a waste of Steve Buscemi.
It's true. And he said, too, that he made that movie so that he could finance Trees Lounge, his directorial debut. So,
which is a much better use of your money.
Yes, one taken for the indie team there. At this point, we've probably given a little too much to Escape from LA.
More to Escape from LA than we had Escape from New York.
We did. You know, just to make that balance better, you're right, Casey. I'm going to throw out a fun fact on Escape from New York. Brain was originally supposed to be Warren Oates, but Warren Oates got ill and passed away before they could do it. But Oates was the one who recommended Harry Dean Stanton. I thought that was kind of a cool little fun fact about that movie.
Good call, Warren Oates.
There you go.
No, bad call on dying, Warren Oates. That's
exactly. How dare you?
Right? How dare you have a massive heart attack in your 50s after you taught Sam Peckinpah how to do coke to kick your drinking habit?
Exactly.
Oh, did that come off as mean? I'm sorry.
No, just funny. I don't make the distinction sometimes.
I think the comedy's in the situation on that one.
Now, while we're here in Kurt Russell land, maybe we should go ahead and take that extra step into Big Trouble in Little China while we're here. I think this is those three films. Well, let me take it back. Let's take Escape from LA out of there. Escape from New York and Big Trouble in Little China actually do make an interesting double feature.
Absolutely.
What was your guys' first experience with Big Trouble in Little China?
Once again, it was a movie my mother loved. You'll hear that come up on this podcast a lot. My mom had very interesting taste in cinema and really influential for me. But I loved it, of course. I mean, I go back and forth with putting it in my top 3 favorite movies of all time. It's definitely in the top 3 most watched movie of all time. I mean, it works on so many it works on every level. It's both an amazing comedy. It's both a very sincere, love letter to especially the
pretty much genre film in general.
Yeah, and it works in every level. The effects are great. The internal mythology is great. All the performances are great. Not just Jack Burton. I will say though, it's funny because Jack Burton thinks he's Snake Plissken, but he's everything that Snake Plissken isn't. And I think it was one of the things, as far as just the genius of writing that script, of making the typical sort of bravado white American hero, the bumbling fool, the dude that's not that capable really, and then surrounding him with people that are more capable than he is. I will go on record as saying it's definitely, I think, Kurt Russell's best performance. It's just a completely realized character, down to everything piece of the costuming. I love it to death. It's one of the movies I will watch in probably the last week of my life.
Yeah, I mean,
hopefully isn't soon.
Basically, kind of what you said as well is the movie encapsulates everything that you want to go to a movie and see. Even if you're not a film geek, it's just you just want to go and be entertained. And it just throws the kitchen sink at you when it comes to that, because it's you've got martial arts, you've got horror elements, you've got Chinese mysticism,
Chinese black magic.
Yeah, great action set pieces. Kurt Russell, performance is just fantastic. And it's just, most movies that would try to be so bold to throw all this stuff at you into a movie, it probably would fail for a most part. But I don't think that's the case with Big Trouble in Little China. I think part of what's great about it is that they did all that and it works. And it's severely rewatchable. It's always fun. it's not a movie that like you see multiple times and go, oh, this isn't as good as I remember. It's like, no, it's still fun as hell. Like,
yeah, it's really held up, and I think you're nailing it there. It's the combination of so many things that Carpenter was able to put together in the right order, and some of the things that he kind of had to finagle to get. For one thing, he wanted Jackie Chan to play the lead, which would have been amazing at the time, but in America, Jackie Chan, if he was even known at all, was known for Cannonball Run.
Right.
So,
well, I mean, I think by that point he had done Battle Creek Brawl, which wasn't like a super huge hit.
Yeah, stop and think about the title you just said. In the United States in 1980.
Hey, man.
6, were they talking?
Well, wasn't Jackie Chan's first like American-made film The Protector?
Yes.
Yeah, so that was like 85, and so that was like a year before this. So he probably wasn't known because that movie wasn't a hit by any means.
No, but I think the thing is, I think what Carpenter, I think first off, if you watch The Protector and even Battle Creek Brawl, is like first off, Jackie spoke English he didn't speak English in The Protector. I think he was dubbed in that. He had somebody else do his American voice, but he speaks English in Battle Creek Brawl, and he sounds exactly the way he does sound today. But I think John Carpenter, besides being really impressed, like John Carpenter's always been into like varied media, and I know he was a fan of kung fu films. Obviously, otherwise he wouldn't have made this movie. But I think he saw the star potential, and eventually what would go on to become true of Jackie Chan, especially when he was vital and young and doing, some of his most amazing films in that period in the mid 80s to early 90s. But yeah, it's unfortunate, but I mean, I think obviously the film we got, is and one thing I feel like it has to be said, one thing I love when filmmakers do, and most don't, but John Carpenter has like all this like rich mythology with like these original like concepts, like the 3 storms and these things, but he doesn't bend over backward trying to explain it. They don't explain, they have very little asides to explain the crazy shit that happens in this movie. There's the ogre, the troll. What's up?
Go ahead. I have a way to wrap that up though, to explain that. But yeah, I mean, it's just I like a movie that just creates these weird mythological, like their own internal mythologies, their own internal concepts, especially ones that get like weird and kind of really like out of this world and far out, and don't like hiss over the head with exposition trying to explain it. Our minds will fill that shit in. In fact, it's cooler. Like the 3 storms are cooler because they didn't try to explain what they were, even though, like I said, if you know specifically Chinese mythology and stuff, there's an origin there. But like they're just cool characters that they don't need to like be like spend 15 minutes trying to explain them, and I like that.
It's just real. It's like, just go on the ride.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
For real.
It's like, I'm sure you're probably questioning like what's going on here, but that's actually part of the fun. You're just like, this is some weird shit, but it's really...
And it's also really smart because after the movie's done, you're still going to be thinking about it.
Exactly.
And that's why the 3 storms as a kid were so cool, because you're like, they're mysterious, just like Boba Fett was, you kind of very mysterious, and then we won't touch on that, but yeah, I think it was really cool, and I'm sure Devin's about to hit us with some behind-the-scenes filmmaking facts.
Oh, well, I do have a couple of fun facts, but I was going to say, I think part of why it works so well on that level of not having to explain everything is because oftentimes when you have screenplays where the audience is taken into a world that they are not as familiar with, which would certainly describe American cinema goers in 1987 towards Chinese culture, there's usually a character that represents the audience going in who's going to be the one who has all the inquisitive moments and all the exposition sort of moments. And for this, we get Jack Burton. And because Jack Burton is just, what the fuck, the whole time,
exactly,
we're okay with kind of having the same thing. What the hell's a little band?
Yeah, he's like
exactly.
He's like the spokesman for the audience. Like,
right. Yeah.
He's like, what the hell am I witnessing right now?
But what I love about it too is that all the other characters, all the characters who live in Chinatown, like just sort of like off the cuff, you're like, well, of course he's a 10-foot, Chinese black magic sorcerer. Of course, like they're so sort of annoyed by his ignorance that they don't even really take his inquiries like, well, of course it's, it is what it is. And it sort of does sort of parallel Americans' bravado and ignorance, especially, like I said, he's definitely channeling a lot of like traditional American hero tropes. There's definitely a lot of John Wayne in there.
Yes,
but again,
that's intentional.
Like Carpenter's kind of, exactly. And Carpenter's sort of playing off our stupid white dumb charge in with complete ignorance, and
exactly.
I think it makes the movie work that much better.
Yeah, I love that like all the characters except for him are kind of like, oh yeah, those are the 3 storms. Oh, you want some more tea?
Exactly, yeah.
Well, that's why he got Russell in the first place. They got Kurt Russell because basically John Carpenter wanted to have a cast of Asian actors, and the only way he was going to get a studio budget for that was if he had Kurt Russell. So he had to basically bill Kurt Russell as the star, but then tell Kurt Russell, and this is actually something that happened, tell him on the set, oh, and by the way, you're the sidekick. And Kurt Russell ran with it. And just a little fun fact, the suit that he wears when he goes into the brothel that's being used as front for Lopan's business is actually a suit that he wore in the movie Used Cars, Robert Zemeckis' Cars, which is great. Another one of my favorite Kurt Russell movies.
Yeah, that movie's fantastic.
I feel like what needs to be said real quick too, it's very much an ensemble film, and I like fucking James Hong, the legend James Hong, kills it as Lopan. Dennis Dunn is great in this, and really, here's this young Asian American actor character, and he's like a cool young dude that they don't play into any stereotypes. They're just normal people who just happen to be Chinese people living in this kind of fantastical setting in this fictionalized version of San Francisco Chinatown. And I love Victor Wong as Egg Shen, amazing. He has some of the best lines in the movie. Kim Cattrall is great in this. Yeah. Dude, overall, I love this. The whole cast is amazing in this, and I think John Carpenter was super smart with his casting on this. I think it really adds to why the film is held up, is because we're not looking back on this film sort of embarrassed, through white guilt isn't making us sort of oh man, this is kind of hard to watch. No, he was, there's no. All of the Chinese characters in this are very three-dimensional characters. I can't say enough about this movie. Obviously,
great movie.
Immediately after Big Trouble is when he kind of started his, late 80s, early 90s, Universal run.
As you get into the kind of Universal stage of John Carpenter, well, he did some other stuff with Universal too that I have a feeling we're kind of building up to one of my favorite movies he did with Universal. But actually, he did a couple with a smaller company called Alive that were distributed by Universal Studios. And on these 2 films from Alive, he actually had full control. So Carpenter he's really a filmmaker who thrives when he has full control. You can tell when the studio's stepping on his throat on something, and we'll have plenty of those to talk about in a minute, I'm sure.
I'd say these are definitely a couple of my favorite movies of his, hands down.
Yeah, they're top notch. And the first one, of course, I'm talking about They Live, which has turned into a much more of an influential and even timely film than I ever understood it to be when I first saw it in the 80s.
Yeah, I love that it's actually getting its kind of kudos now and getting heavily marketed with toys and collectibles and stuff. It's something I've always
wanted.
I want a John Nada figure so bad. Yeah. And now it's finally coming to fruition all these years later. It's fantastic.
Now, I know I'm going to get an earful of what Jim thinks about this because this is Roddy Piper.
That's right. I'm trying to remain
superstar who actually quit the WWF in order to make this movie. Did you know that?
Yep. He went, there's more to that story, but yes, pretty much he wanted to, this came up and he already wanted to transition into acting because he was sort of bored, and there's some political stuff with the WWE that we won't go into, but yes, I did.
Yes. My understanding was that Vince McMahon was a controlling dick, and
yes.
For some reason didn't want him to do this film in particular. I'm sure because it was a statement against kind of
him and his buddies, everything he believed in.
Reaganism was what Carpenter calls it, a rebellion against. I actually wonder too, back in the good old days, let's say, back when it wasn't uncommon to find a conservative hanging out with a liberal, and they weren't at each other's throats. They just kind of gently and even strongly, but politely disagreed about certain things. The whole Kurt Russell, John Carpenter thing in general, such a wonderful friendship, such a wonderful working relationship. Yep. But John Carpenter, if you go by the themes of his movies, is most certainly a liberal. And Kurt Russell, probably wisely, I haven't heard much about his politics lately. I have a feeling he's probably more along the line of speaking the way Arnold Schwarzenegger does on the matter. But
he's a libertarian anyways, right? He's
Yes.
Yeah.
And you know, we're splitting hairs on things that really the show is not about. But I just did want to
That's
point
right.
out, I find it interesting that either Carpenter was kind of feeling some Russell fatigue or vice versa, or I think that Russell may have sat this movie out because of the Reagan message of it, that the government is trying to destroy the middle class, and basically what the Obey movement came out of. And which Carpenter
Literally,
himself, Carpenter has had to make public statements about his intentions with the film. In fact, I think I might have something here. He said it was a vehicle to take on Reaganism, and then over the years, neo-Nazis and white supremacist groups have co-opted it for their own purpose. And his response was, "They Live is about yuppies and unrestrained capitalism. It has nothing to do with Jewish control of the world, which is slander and a lie." And I'm glad that he stuck his neck out there for his artwork and for his beliefs and had that to say, because we all want to be on the side of the humans versus the aliens. I get that. But don't bury the message that was intended, which I think, even as a kid, it was like the audience was wearing the sunglasses. It was very obvious once you put on the sunglasses.
Yes.
And
wait, are you trying to tell me that white supremacists misunderstood the message of something? Get out of here.
You're talking gibberish.
That doesn't happen.
But of course, when you talk about They Live, we're not necessarily just here to talk about the messaging behind it. We're here to talk about the 5-minute long fight sequence. Anyone want to check that out?
So first off, I've talked about this movie on more podcasts than I never knew it was possible. But this movie is everything that I think Carpenter excels at, which is taking a relatively stupid premise and really finding the humanity in it, and really finding where the best way to get an audience really invested. Everything about this movie shouldn't work, but does. Casting a professional wrestler who had never really acted before as your lead, everything about it works for me. And I think not just for me. Obviously, as you said, it's become one of those films that's become more popular over time. And again, there's something very prescient about it. Obviously, it's very timely, more so now than almost ever, sadly, which should be heartbreaking. But everything about it is really interesting. First off, the design of the aliens, incredible, and John Carpenter was really key on that, about what he wanted. Mm-hmm. Design of the aliens, amazing. The cast, amazing. Keith David as his sort of his buddy / like John Nada is this, he's not even like a real person. He's almost like the spirit of individuality. He's like this. I mean, his name is John Nada, for God's sake. So he's almost like, he's really almost just like the everyman, what the American dream is, where, Keith David plays a much more reasonable character. He's just a normal guy just trying to live his life. And here comes this dude who sort of literally physically drags him into having this new point of view. And Keith David in that role is perfect. Yeah. Meg Foster and her fucking creepy and insane eyes is amazing in this. Dude. And it's great. It's got an ending, which I think was pretty ballsy, kind of ending you don't see in those kind of movies, that still manages to find the really great humor in it. And that's the thing, is this movie's genuinely really funny when it wants to be, and really like heart aching and heartbreaking when it wants to be. But it's legendary for a reason. Obviously, it spawned all these different things. One of which is obviously the Obey inspiration. The other is some of the dialogue has become notorious. Roddy Piper, which wasn't the first time he ever said, "I came here to chew bubblegum and kick ass," and I'm all out of bubblegum. He'd said that before. Carpenter wanted him to sort of find his voice in a few things, and that's when Roddy starts becoming himself more, is when he really starts becoming a more interesting character. But the movie sort of I'm sorry, I'm going off on a tangent here, but obviously you can see how important this movie is to me. But Roddy, there's some things that sometimes the movie fumbles a little bit, but it's in those times when it fumbles a little bit that you're kind of really find your heart in the movie, and you sort of appreciate what's happening. And again, one of my things is watching the documentary on this. Shout Factory put a really great documentary when they released it a few years ago about how much everybody, all the night, because at this point, the documentary, Roddy Piper had unfortunately passed, but how really Meg Foster was really generous to him, saying she was he had no real acting skills, but he tried really hard, and she thought he did really well. And Keith David said all these really nice things, but you could tell that like the movie shouldn't work. It's a stupid idea on surface. When you get into it, it's a brilliant idea, and that's why the social commentary is brilliant. But the if you were to describe it in its basics, it's a stupid, almost like a 1950s sci-fi, which I feel like almost had to have been like a small influence in it.
Oh, Pod People were definitely an influence on this.
But it's a great movie. I'm going to stop talking because I don't want to. But it's I love it. I love every single second of that movie.
Yeah, I love it as well. The only like complaint I could say about it, and it's not necessarily it's not how I feel about it, but I could see other people feeling about it, is like it's kind of a little slow to get going. It's definitely like a lot of setup of like the world and how the capitalism is affecting everybody. So it's not that it's not important. It's very important. But like, you know, before you get to like the real action and you know, like truly know what's happening, it kind of takes its time to get there. But God, man, once it does, it's just brilliant. And no matter how, I mean, when you think of like badass characters and John Carpenter, I mean, most people tend to go to Kurt Russell first, but I think this is easily probably the most quotable like Carpenter film there is, basically because of Roddy Piper and what he brought to it. But like, you know, besides the bubblegum line, like just, you know, shit like, you know, life's a bitch and she's back in heat, you know, like you're just like, what the fuck? Like, who says that? Like, but you're like, I don't care. It's amazing. and yeah, that fight is, I think to this day, it's still my favorite like fight ever in a movie.
Yeah. I think it holds the record,
and
for
not
the
necessarily
longest...
because it's at length.
Yeah.
I mean, the length of it is impressive, but it's just like, it's just so unrelenting. It's like you're in a alley and these dudes are just getting slammed into like cars and fucking pavement, and you're just like, God, this fuck. You feel every hit in that goddamn fight,
and yet they never break the sunglasses.
So yeah, and
the other thing, though, too, in that scene is there's so much story being told in that fight, and like there's so many great moments in the fight when like
that's why we forgive the fight that length. That length is actually, to be completely honest, that length is ridiculous and completely uncalled for, which is why I love it. And in anybody else's hands, it might have been a disaster. And it wasn't just Carpenter; it was. Piper had a lot to do with that, and he took Keith David with him to they rehearsed this thing for days. So this was really a technological feat that they were able to pull this off for that length.
But you can see in that scene like they're fighting, but like you can see that they're starting to develop a bond in that scene. Like when he breaks the window and, you know, Roddy starts laughing, like, oh shit, I'm sorry. And then they continue the fight. That you wouldn't see that in a different movie, which in fact, that sequence, I feel like really I can see like the influence where he has of like Jackie Chan and Sammo Hung. I can feel where like that's an element that you would see in, you know, the humanists breaking down that thing. But one of the things I feel like needs to be said is, thank you. I try sometimes. But Keith David went on record as saying, like, you know, it took a lot to film that, and they would film things over and over again. But like, first off, I don't know if you like Roddy Piper got in the best shape of his life for this movie. I think at this point, I think he was starting to do what like Hogan and Randy Savage were doing. Not going to make any assumptions, but he definitely got more jacked. But you know, Roddy Piper, you know, who's never known as being some brilliant in-ring performer. He wasn't like a college athlete or whatever, but still obviously it's a demanding job. But Keith David said like he couldn't believe it. Like shot after shot of like they would set him up for the suplex and John Carpenter like, are you okay, Roddy? He's like, yeah, sure. And he'd pick Keith David up and hold him while they set the scene, and he'd have to sit there holding Keith David up until he was set go, and then he'd drop him, and they'd get right back up and do it. And he's like, I was exhausted, and Roddy was just like, yeah, let's do this. So I was like,
now where the fuck was
mad respect for my boy Roddy Piper?
Where was the set photographer while all that was going on? I want pictures of him just
I know, for real.
Holding, like what was the look on his face? Was he looking there?
Hanging up.
Was he in character looking tough, or was he just like taking a smoke break with this gigantic man up over his head?
I know, it's crazy.
Another cool thing about that movie on the technical side, John Carpenter actually put a lot of actual homeless people to work for this movie, which I think is kind of neat. The main characters, both of these characters that are fighting, they're coming from a homeless camp. And a good portion of the beginning of the movie takes place amongst the homeless. And I thought it was really a class act that Carpenter took on homeless people that lived in that area to make sure that they got a decent meal and a paycheck while their film crew invaded their space. and made this amazing movie. And another fun fact about the release of it, the release was actually delayed. It was set for an October 21st, 1988 release date. It moved back to November 4th. Anybody care to guess why?
The Olympics? No, I have no idea.
Halloween.
It did not want to compete with Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers. Which,
that makes
for
a
the
lot
record,
of sense.
that was the one where John Carpenter finally dusted his hands off of the franchise and said, "You guys take this shit. You're on your own now." So it's kind of funny that the first time out of the gate without Carpenter was swinging right there against him. Not against him, but you know what I mean.
But still.
They Live also has one of my favorite scores too by him.
Yes.
Yes.
It's so iconic, that just, simplistic, like it. It always puts a smile on my face anytime I hear it.
I've used that as background when I write other stuff. When I'm writing kind of action-y horror, I do go to Carpenter soundtracks a lot, and They Live is definitely on the playlist there. But speaking of homeless people, the homeless people in the next movie were not as intellectual and kind as they were in They Live. I can see James wringing his hands ready for this. James, you obviously know what film this is. Do you want to bring it up?
I'm assuming you're talking about Prince of Darkness.
Yeah, it's time. Let's get into this.
Okay. Yeah. So, again, it's hard to say because, again, this guy made The Thing, They Live. I won't say Prince of Darkness is my favorite of his movies, but I will say it's my favorite of specifically his horror movies. Now, I know some people who strongly disagree with that, and that's fine. I think this movie is, for some reason, works with what I want out of horror. But yeah, it's for the longest time it wasn't one of his more. I don't even think it was. I could even say it was almost like a forgotten Carpenter movie. It wasn't one that people talked about. I think the only thing people really talked about was that it was Alice Cooper was in the movie. I think it was the main
for about 5 seconds.
Hey, Alice Cooper's. Yeah, exactly.
And he did a song for it too.
Yeah, but I mean, my thing with this movie is, first off, it has half the cast of Big Trouble in Little China.
Yes.
But
I thought it was really cool he brought them back. And it was outside of James Wong, who I welcome as a presence in any film. The two actors that did come back for Prince of Darkness, who I do not see in other stuff very often. It was great to see those particular two actors come back. Yeah.
Yes. I couldn't agree more. But yeah, it's the concept of the thing I like about it, for the people that haven't seen it, it's basically like, first of all, it's got Donald Pleasance in his least Donald Pleasance-y type role.
No, I think he's not like Donald Pleasance on the whole time. Why didn't they tell us? Didn't they know what?
That's true.
Why didn't they tell us the truth?
But there's less of.
Whereas in Halloween, he's saying the evil is gone. The evil is gone from here. But the rest of later career Donald Pleasance level.
That's a good
Donald
point, I guess.
Yeah. Sorry.
But yeah, so the whole concept of like there's I think what really affected me the first time I saw it was just using like things like theoretical physics to sort of explain or investigate, the essence of evil, or what is, Satan, or, even in this movie, it sort of invents its own mythology a little bit, which is a portion which I think is a little bit the most murky thing in it, but I still like it. And I think, first off, it's my favorite John Carpenter score. I think it's his creepiest score. I love it. There's so many scenes in this movie where even if I just start thinking about the scene, I will start getting a little creeped out. And I think it's incredible. There's all of the practical effects in this are fucking really well done. It just has this, to me, it seems like it's almost inspired by Italian horror, like as if,
I was going to mention that too.
Yeah, it definitely has that vibe, like that Bava vibe and the Fulci vibe, and there's definitely some visual cues, I think. In fact, I always liked this. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie The Church.
Yes, and it reminds me, not plot-wise necessarily, but their visual elements are reminding me.
Yeah, and I love watching them as a double feature because they both unnerve me. But yeah, and it's got a bunch of, the main actor is from like Simon and Simon. He didn't go on to really do much, but I think he was perfect in this role because he definitely has a much more everyman kind of aspect. But it's definitely, there's no one person leading this role.
He did have a very, very fantastic mustache though.
He did a great mustache. But yeah, it's very creepy. There's some really haunting moments from this movie. I like that there's a lot of things where you're like, sort of like, when you start to think about it, where you're like, what? They're just going to take in these like unpaid interns. I don't know. There's some like weird,
We're gonna tap into the source of all the evil in the universe. Send a couple college kids in.
Exactly, some unpaid college kids in.
Get the interns.
But I mean, dude, like, there's so much of the like that sort of tube cage thing that essence of the devil is in. Like, there's just so many cool looking things. But
you know what I love too, before we pass away from the tube, because it'll probably won't come up again. I always appreciated the tube looks like a new thing, and it's a tube with this swirling green. You can't tell if it's fluid or smoke or what, but something green that's just swirling at a faster and faster rate as the movie goes on. And it's ominous enough, but you think like this is something like you don't expect to see this in the middle of a church. Like, what's going on with this? And it kind of looks like a special effect. So it didn't seem menacing enough until they start analyzing it and they realize that it's like 7 million years old. And then suddenly it's like, oh shit, this thing that looks like it came from the future is actually really before man.
And, and one of the things I was actually saying about it is I like the fact that there's no context for that. Like, we've never seen that before, especially when you're with the devil. And then even more, to exactly your point, how much it starts to get creepier the more they show it, especially when they get up close and you start to see the real age of it, the fact that like this thing is corrosive, and like there's so many things about this movie I love, but mainly my thing is, for me, it's one of just horror movies in general, which, I think says a lot, is that I think it continues to be legitimately creepy and unnerving every time I've seen it, and I've seen it a lot. And that's hard with horror. A lot of times you start to be sort of deadened to the scares, even really, intense movies, the more you see them. But there's just the movie builds an atmosphere. I think that's the best word. There's an atmosphere to this movie that Carpenter made that I think is amazing. So, and
it builds on this dread. There's a sequence in the movie, for those who don't know, there's the plot of Prince of Darkness is this thing that's in this church, and it's been stored there for a really long time, and people don't know what it is, and they're analyzing it, and they realize that it's not just Satan, it's like the father of Satan that is held within this thing. And so like it's not the Antichrist, it's the anti-God. It is the creator of the creator of our suffering. And so, which is a pretty heavy subject to begin with. And the fact that they tie it all into science just is kind of fascinating and actually very British. And that's why it's kind of cool that John Carpenter, he wrote the screenplay himself, but he credits himself as Martin Quatermass, which is a nod to the Quatermass experiment, which was a British, a Hammer film, sci-fi film, dealing with deities and science at the same time. But one of the scenes that gets me every time, and it's a perfect blend of like old dread and new technology for, whenever this was, 1987. And that's people in the future of 1999, which is obviously 1999.
Yes.
Are sending this message back to the people who are researching this tube of evil, and they can only transmit it in the form of dreams, but all they have to transmit with is video cassette. So there's this weird sort of like they're limited by their own technology, but at the same time they have the technology to transmit into the dreams of people in the past. And the Carpenter achieved the dream sequences by actually filming the sequence on VHS and then putting a film camera in front of a television set, showing what he had done on VHS, so that it wasn't just that it looked like it was somebody's home movie, it was something otherworldly. And as you're creeping around this building that the movie takes place in this VHS, you're getting to this door that's like glowing, and you start to see this presence coming out of it, and you're starting to realize like this is evil, this is Satan's papa coming out this door into Los Angeles somewhere. And this isn't a spoiler, but you never really see it fully come out because it's a dream sequence. But the fact that you just kind of see this thing that looks so normal, like anybody else's VHS home movies, and then this creature coming out of a light through this doorway, there's something really unsettling about the way he did that. And I got to hand it to Carpenter. It's still one of my most eerie and frightening images I can think of in any film from that period, which in my opinion is the best film for horror movies, best period for horror movies.
Great. And I'm so glad you mentioned it, because I'm kicking myself something else for not bringing up that point specifically. There's something about, first of all, the way they filmed it, but even like the music and the sound design of that when they show it. But when that silhouette kind of appears in the door as the kind of camera is moving, first of all, it feels like you're actually.
It's humanoid, but inhuman. Like we don't know.
Exactly, and it's truly
got arms
creepy.
And a head, but like where they connect, I don't know.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yes, it's one of my favorite aspects of that film.
And for years, when people would mention that movie, that is the shot. Like, that is the actual image that would pop into my head. I was actually lucky enough to see this in the theater several years back. In fact, the time when I lived in New York, I don't know what was in the water, but John Carpenter was going through a huge revival at the time. And just during the 3 years that I was out there, I managed to see nearly every single John Carpenter movie played in the theater out there, and most of them at Lincoln Center, which is a nice, huge like museum quality screen. And They Live was one of them, and it was double featured with Prince of Darkness. And getting to see, almost in a juxtaposition kind of way, getting to see that VHS shot of the film shooting the VHS, but projected on a screen now. But seeing it that large was really, really creepy. And I remember the friend that I took with me had never seen it before, and he's probably still talking about it.
I like Prince of Darkness for a lot of the reasons you guys have brought up. I do think it's his creepiest movie. I think it's his weirdest movie, and in the best possible way for stuff that's already been brought up. There's just so many weird visuals and like just creepy shit going on in that movie. And the fact that, because it's trying to tie in like science to something that's kind of like supernatural and stuff, I find interesting. And the fact that you possibly couldn't know as an average moviegoer, like all the stuff that they're bringing up, you just kind of have to trust them with it.
Yeah.
And just kind of have like a semblance of it in order to like enjoy the film, I thought was really interesting. And like you said, the green spinning tube is always etched in my mind when I think of that movie. It's definitely something that it's definitely a movie of his that, was kind of looked over, but I'm glad is kind of now getting the attention it deserves, because even I was kind of like late to the game on that one. Like I didn't see that first run, and yeah, it's definitely one of my favorites by him. And like you said, it probably is like, as far as true horror goes, it's probably the best one out of his filmography for that, for the reasons that we've discussed. And it's any Carpenter fan that hasn't seen Prince of Darkness, you should get on that like immediately. It's so underrated.
Yeah, anytime I talk to somebody who loves horror and hasn't seen it, I'm like, oh shit, dude! It's like to me, I know this might be hyperbolic, but to me, it's like if you've never seen The Shining. For me, I'm like, you need to see this movie because it's one, is really unexpected, especially if you know Carpenter's work, and two, like I said, there's just so many levels to it of why it affects me that I'm always like, oh, dude. It's a highest recommendation for people who are fans of horror but have never.
The movie you just mentioned, that actually provides a perfect lead-in to another one. Because, around the early 80s, there was a saying going around amongst every horror director, and that was, I gotta get me a Stephen book. And for Carpenter, we'll get into it maybe a little bit later, what it almost was, but what it ended up being was Christine. If you want to go over Christine briefly, we are starting to run into
Part 2 territory.
Part 2 territory. But you know what? We haven't spoken to each other, all three of us together, in quite some time, so I think that we can be self-indulgent here. But nonetheless, sorry, Starman. We're probably just going to say, hey, Starman was awesome. But that's
not the movie.
It is.
Yeah.
Jeff Bridges is fantastic. He studied birds so that he would have that kind of look to him. And he's the only actor that was ever nominated for an Oscar for a John Carpenter movie, and that is Starman. But to get into Christine, I think there's actually more to Christine than most people were really giving it credit for at the time. It wasn't one of the really popular Stephen King adaptations for me, maybe it was just because I was young. I remember when I was 11 years old, that was the year I got a VCR for my bedroom for Christmas. Most kids, I think, by the time they were about 11, at least had a TV in their room. This was the 80s, so I think a lot of kids might have had. My first TV was a black and white, so it was that ancient. But I begged my parents for a VCR in my room because there were all these movies I wanted to rent that I knew that my parents were not going to let me watch because I had to watch it in the living room where my brother and sister could see it. And along with, I got my wish. I must have been a good boy that year. but I got a VCR and I got 2 movies on VHS, and they were both Stephen King adaptations, so appropriate for the age. The first one was Stand By Me, and the second one was Christine. Does anybody else have any fond memories of Christine? Yeah, it was a good Christmas.
No fun memories. What I will say, like, as a kid, I, like every kid at that age, like, I grew up, loving Stephen King, reading Stephen King books in my summer. But I think Christine was the one. Christine and Cujo were the 2 adaptations which I had the least. I didn't watch them a lot as kids. I probably saw them a handful of times, and probably when they were on TV and not like on VHS.
I couldn't handle Cujo as a kid. I still can't. It's too hard. Like, I can't. I refuse to look at Cujo as a villain. But
the whole thing is sad. Yeah, it's like a tragic. But I mean, that movie is actually
really good.
That movie is and to this day, it's like it affects me. Like, watching it, I get like it was filmed brilliantly, but we're not here to talk about Cujo. No. But I will say, like, it is weird that there is a whole like subgenre of horror of like killer automobiles. Like that, there's been a lot of those movies, if you think about it, down to like trucks and the car. Obviously, things like Duel and stuff. But
even Stephen King's tackled again in Maximum Overdrive.
Yep, exactly.
Oh man, I could do a whole episode on Maximum Overdrive.
The best movie ever made on cocaine.
Oh my god!
Hey, honey, this machine just called me an asshole.
Oh god, I love it. But yeah, I mean, it's a good. I'll just say this: it's a good movie featuring the least likely main actor of the '80s with Keith Gordon. I still don't know. His film career is. Yeah. It's just, I still don't. It's weird. His agent must have been a miracle worker, but
there's a reason he became a director.
Yeah, but yeah, it's great. I think the best thing I'll say about the movie though is the effects, the cinematography, and the soundtrack. Overall, I mean, the movie's good. It's actually a good movie, and everybody's in it. Kelly Preston's good in it, but it's it's a good movie. I don't really have much more to say than that. Outside, like I said, the effects with everything with Christine, everything works.
I'm kind of on the same wavelength. Like, I like it, I enjoy it, I'll watch it if it's on. It's not one that sticks out to me as like iconic as some of his other works, but I mean, I definitely could see why it would be for someone else. But just my own personal experience with it, like it's it's just like, oh yeah, Christine's a cool movie, and it's well made and it's entertaining. Like, a lot of Carpenter's work.
Yep, yeah, pretty much.
But yeah, I don't have like super fond memories of watching it a lot or anything like that personally. But yeah, it's definitely a damn good movie. It should be watched for sure. Yeah,
for real.
For a movie about a monster car, I've got no complaints.
Yeah, absolutely.
And because the killer was a car, it's kind of funny that it fell right before the invention of PG-13. And it was getting a PG, and it was kind of the kiss of death for a horror movie. There are certain horror movies that have had to fight to get their R rating, but from the other direction. And Army of Darkness was one too, where Army of Darkness, really, let's face it, that's a PG-13 movie that they smacked an R on because the gore reaches ridiculous levels, but It's a PG-13 movie. It was going to make even less money than it made eventually by being an R-rated movie. And the same was with Christine. They really wanted an R-rated movie. So if you'll notice, they say fuck a lot in the movie. So that was how they were able to guarantee that they got an R with a movie about a killer car. And final fun fact on Christine before we move on, because to me this is something that I love. Nicolas Cage was almost cast as Buddy Repperton, the bully of the school that Arnie goes to. So we almost got to see Nicolas Cage as the bully in Christine, the one that Christine kills at the gas station by setting him on fire and then running over him or whatever. Which Nicolas Cage is the bully in anything. In whenever that was, 1980. 83 was Christine.
83. I'm good with the years.
You are pretty good with the years, yeah. It was.
Yeah, that's kind of telling me that Nicolas Cage was almost the villain of that movie is like telling me that Crispin Glover was almost the villain of that movie. And I would have seen either version of those.
Exactly.
I'm not complaining, but yeah, I definitely would have been interested in that version for sure. But the version that exists is great. It's a solid King adaptation. It's a solid Carpenter film.
And again, I have to go on record saying that movie looks amazing. Still this day, it's really a very slickly shot film. Yeah, it's a
very well shot film, for sure.
Hey guys, so thanks for listening to the podcast. This actually officially ends part 1 of our John Carpenter episode.
What assholes, man. We keep on doing this.
I know, unintentional. But there's just so much to talk about. John Carpenter is obviously a legendary filmmaker, and we want to make sure all of his films are given their right due. And plus, having Casey on was a shit ton of fun.
Yes.
Definitely a shit ton. Is a shit ton different than a regular ton? I don't really know if I understand.
Not a crap ton, a shit ton.
A shit ton, because we feel strongly.
What weighs more though?
On that note,
a crap ton of feathers or a shit ton of feathers? Which one weighs more?
That's what I'm saying. I don't know science. How do magnets work?
Shit ton.
On that note, thanks for listening to part 1 of our John Carpenter episode. We're going to tie this up right now. So when you listen to part 2, we're sort of just picking up where we left off. But again, Devin and I and Casey really appreciate you listening. Have a great and happy Halloween, and can't wait for you to listen to part 2.
And make sure you find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts, Amazon, and we are on YouTube now as well. So make sure you're looking to every place that you find podcasts. In fact, go listen to us in all those places. Go, just pick it up on like 6 different spots.
Yeah.
We could really use the numbers right now. So, but we love you. Thanks
put on multiple stereos. It'll be like that Flaming Lips album. You can hear us talking all day. It'll be like a sonic experiment.
You will feel
do
like
some peyote. It'll be nice.
You'll feel like Casey's really in the room, man. And
I like the 0% of our listeners that got that reference, but it's fine.
Right. I mean,
I got it. That's all that matters.
I know. I did it for you, Casey.
All right.
Fuck everyone else.
All right, guys. Well, thank you for joining us for this.
That's going to be the new tagline of our show.
Den of Cin. Fuck everyone else.
Fuck everybody else. First T-shirt.
There you go. I'm actually all for that, oddly enough. But thanks for joining us, and we will see you next time when we get back into part 2 on John Carpenter. Happy Halloween, everybody.